Hey Flight Test friends, in this segment we're going to be covering vertical and horizontal stabilizers. The build methods that we will be going over are going to be common to many of the aircraft that you're going to be building. We have selected a variety of examples that will highlight some of the minor differences you will encounter from model to model. Let's jump right in and look at our first example. The first example of the horizontal and vertical stabilizer that we're going to be looking at today is from the T-28 Trojan. Let's take a look at the symbols. If we look up here, we see a bevel start. Here at the other end, we see a bevel stop. We see a remove foam symbol and another remove foam symbol. The other marking we see here is a skewer with an arrow. Looking at the vertical stabilizer, we see a bevel start, a bevel stop, and then we also see the word skewer with an arrow indicating that it goes up here. There's also a remove foam symbol. Let's begin by running the backside of a razor blade down the score. Once that's been done, let's break it open backwards and let's cut a bevel all the way across. Once we've cut the bevel, I'm going to run a bead of glue right along the seam. And using a piece of scrap, we're going to remove the glue. Leave the elevator in the open position until the glue's had a chance to cool down. Now that the glue's had a chance to cool down, we're going to install our barbecue skewer. The barbecue skewer adds a ton of strength. Let's begin by cutting it to length. I'll lay my barbecue skewer along this line right here. And using my razor blade, I'm going to mark it and roll it just slightly. This will show me where I need to cut it off. Using a razor blade, I'm going to press straight down and roll the barbecue skewer back and forth. I don't have to cut all the way through, but I am going about halfway through. The tip will easily break off once you get it cut. After cutting the barbecue skewer, we next need to delaminate the paper. Using a push rod, I'm going to run it right underneath the paper. I'm going to push it in about 1/4 inch, and I'm going to draw it all the way across. You can see how the paper is delaminating from the foam. I'm going to do it one more time. All right, once that's been done, I'm going to take and I'm going to fold the paper back. Once that's been done, I'm going to take a barbecue skewer and I'm going to push it right into this cut. What I'm doing is I'm creating a cavity that'll hold the barbecue skewer. I'm going to do this 2 or 3 times, each time opening it up just a little bit more. Once that's been done, I'm going to push my barbecue skewer down. If you're having trouble creating a large enough cavity, you can fold your paper all the way back and create a small bevel using a razor blade. My barbecue skewer looks good. I'm going to run a bead of glue right across the barbecue skewer. I'm carefully going to push the paper closed using a ruler. The reason I'm using a ruler, it's real easy to burn yourself on this step. I'm going to hold this down for about 45 seconds while the glue cools down. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to use the back side of my razor blade and go along the 2 scores here in the front. Next, we're going to remove the foam. Once that's been removed, I'm going to run a bead of glue right where the paper meets the foam. Next, I'm going to fold it straight up. Once that's had a chance to cool for a few seconds, I'm going to run a bead of glue near the edge of the paper. Fold it flat and slide it across the table. The reason I'm sliding it across the table is I want to make sure that if there's any glue seeping out, my part doesn't stick to the tabletop. Now let's repeat the process on the other side. Now let's do our first vertical stabilizer. To build the vertical stabilizer, we are going to need to install a barbecue skewer. If we look at our mapping right here, we're going to need to remove the foam and add the skewer to this area right here. Let's open that up now. Using the back side of my razor blade, I'm going to run down each of these scores. I'm going to break it over and remove foam from the channel. I'm going to cut my instructions off. We're not going to need those anymore. And I'm going to flip it around, and I see a bevel start and a bevel stop. Let's add that bevel now. Once we've added our bevel, I'm going to insert the barbecue skewer. Notice that I'm flush up here at the top. I'm going to make sure that I've got all the little bits of foam out so it lays down flat on the table. Once I'm happy with my test fit, I'm going to run a bead of glue on the edge that has not been beveled. I'm going to reinsert my barbecue skewer. I'm going to press it straight down. Be careful when pressing your barbecue skewer down that you don't get your fingers in the glue. Give that a full minute to cool down. Then we're going to add a little bit of glue to the seam to strengthen it. Now that the glue's cooled, I'm going to open up the rudder and run a bead of glue between the barbecue skewer and the bevel. Using scrap, I'm going to remove all the excess. And I'm going to hold it in the open position for at least 45 seconds, giving the glue time to cool down. The last thing we need to do is cut the barbecue skewer here at the bottom. Now that we've completed the Trojan vertical and horizontal stabilizer, let's move on to another example. On the last horizontal stabilizer, we had one barbecue skewer that ran right down the middle. If we look at the symbol mapping on this example, you'll see there's a skewer indicator here and a skewer indicator here. Not only will we have a barbecue skewer right here in the middle, we're also going to run one on each of the leading edges for some additional strength. Let's begin by adding a bevel to our elevator. Just like before, I'm going to use the back side of my razor blade and run it right down the score. I'm going to break my part open and add a bevel. We'll add glue to the seam and wipe away the excess. Leave the elevator in the full open position while the glue cools down. Next, we're going to delaminate the paper so we can add a barbecue skewer. All right, once that's been done, I'm going to take and I'm going to fold the paper back. Just like before, we're going to open up a cavity for a barbecue skewer. With the paper folded all the way flat, I'm going to add a very small bevel. Using my barbecue skewer, I'm going to remove the foam I just cut. Once I've got a channel opened up, I'm going to measure my barbecue skewer and cut it off to length. I'm marking it using my thumbnail. Just like before, I'm pressing down with a razor blade and rolling the barbecue skewer, and breaking off the end. I want to make sure when I press down that the barbecue skewer is flush. That looks good. Next, I'm going to run a bead between the barbecue skewer and the exposed foam. And using a ruler, I'm going to fold the paper back over the skewer. We'll hold this in place for a few seconds, and then we're going to work on the leading edge. Let's begin by removing foam from both of the leading edges. I'm going to start with the back side of a razor blade down each of the scores. Let's tear the foam away. Before we roll the paper over the leading edge, we're going to be inserting a barbecue skewer on both sides. First, we need to cut our barbecue skewer to length. We'll do that by making a mark using our razor blade, and we're going to roll the barbecue skewer back and forth underneath the edge of the blade, and we're going to break it off. And cut another one the same length. Once that's been done, I'm going to run a bead of glue where the foam meets the paper. Push my barbecue skewer in. I'm going to rotate it straight up and press straight down. Hold this in place for about 45 seconds, and then we'll wrap the paper around and glue it in place. Just like before, we're going to run a bead of glue near the edge of the paper. I'm going to fold it all the way flat and gently slide it across the tabletop. Let's do the same on the other side. On this next example, let's take a look at the symbol mapping and let's put together a game plan. Here we've got a bevel start. Down at the other end, we've got a bevel stop. We see here in the middle, we've got a skewer. It's going to fit right inside of this knockout. We will be removing foam. If you look up here, just off the edge of the part itself, you see HS. HS stands for Horizontal Stabilizer. A refers to it being the A side. On the other end, it's the B side. That'll help you put the correct part on the correct side. So HS will be attaching to VS. VS stands for Vertical Stabilizer, and we will be attaching the two parts using a tab in slot fit. If you take a look at our vertical stabilizers, you can see that there's not a lot that we're going to have to do. If we take a look at this rectangle, we'll see that we simply need to remove the foam. Up here, you'll see VSB, and over here, you'll see VSA. This simply tells us that one of them is going to fit on the A side, one of them is going to fit on the B side. Now, since my markings are actually off the edge of the part itself, I'm going to take the scrap and I'm going to place it right up here where I can look up and check to see that this is my A side and this is my B side. I want to make sure that whenever it comes time to glue the vertical stabilizers in place, I am gluing them to the correct side. Let's begin by running the backside of a razor blade down the score, adding the bevel, and then adding some glue to the seam for strength. As the glue's cooling down, I'm going to use the backside of my razor blade and run it along the score here at the front. Next, I'm going to peel away the foam. You can see that I'm using the flat edge of the razor blade to remove some of the pieces that are stuck. Once that's been done, I'm going to fit the barbecue skewer into this cutout here at the front. Mark it with my finger. And let's make a cut. Okay, our test fit looks good. I'll run a bead of glue where the foam meets the paper. Insert my barbecue skewer and hold in place. Once that's had a few seconds to cool down, I'm going to run a bead of glue along the paper near the edge. And I'm going to flip things over and drag it along the tabletop. Once the glue's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to make sure that I've got the word skewer facing up, and I'm going to drop it back into my scrap. I can see that over here is my A side, over here is my B side. Next, I'm going to take one of my vertical stabilizers and put it over here, and put the other one over here. Having stuff placed on the table on the correct side will ensure that we install the vertical stabilizers on their correct sides. Let's begin on the A side. I'm going to first remove the foam using the dull end of a barbecue skewer. Let's do the same on the other side. Now that the foam has been removed from both vertical stabilizers, let's do our first test fit. Let's first remove the vertical stabilizer from the scrap. I want to confirm one more time I'm working on the A side. And let's do our first test fit. I'm going to flip the horizontal stabilizer over and do a tab in slot fit. Okay, our fit looks good. I'm going to run a heavy bead of glue inside the slot. Lay it flat on the table and drop the horizontal stabilizer straight in. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2 minutes while the glue cools down. Now let's do the same thing on the other side. Now that we've covered the construction of a variety of different vertical and horizontal stabilizers, let's actually install a horizontal and vertical stabilizer onto a tail section. Before we do our first test fit, it's very important that the slot cut for the horizontal stabilizer was cut correctly. Whenever the slot is cut, it's very important that the blade is horizontal to the table when making the cut. Looks like here at the back I need to remove a little bit more material so that my slot is wide enough. There we go. I just took off a sliver, but that'll make a big difference. Next, I'm going to center and run my horizontal stabilizer into the slot until it comes to a stop. Most horizontal stabilizers will have markings of some sort that you can use for centering. Okay, our test fit looks good. One thing that I like to do is I only like to apply a small amount of glue at this point. Once we install our main wing, we'll come back and glue things up a little bit better. To tack the horizontal stabilizer in place, I'm simply going to run a very fine bead of glue where the horizontal stabilizer meets the tail. Do the same on the other side. That'll be enough to keep everything held in place. Give the glue a chance to cool down, and then we'll install our vertical stabilizer. To do a test fit on the vertical stabilizer, I first want to locate the reference marks. I'll see one here at the back in the center and one right here. I'm going to line up my vertical stabilizer to these two marks, and I'm going to push the whole assembly forward. I'm going to flip the assembly upside down. You'll notice that my barbecue skewer is making contact with the spline running down the center. My test fit looks good. Next, I'm going to run a bead of glue down the underside of the vertical stabilizer. I'm going to make contact with the barbecue skewer on the spline and carefully line things up to the reference mark. I'm going to hold this in place for a full minute and a half while the glue cools down. Next, I want to flip the entire assembly upside down. I'm going to be applying a bead of glue between the barbecue skewer and the spline. The barbecue skewer should be centered on the seam between the two splines. Give that a chance to cool down, then we're going to flip it over and glue the tab in place. The last thing we need to do is we need to glue the paper tab coming off the splines to the rudder. I'm going to apply a small amount of glue and carefully push the paper tab closed. Be real careful in this step that you don't get burned. I'm going to use a razor blade to help me push that tab over. As I mentioned earlier, most vertical and horizontal stabilizers will attach in this manner. However, there are some aircraft that have a very unique tail section. In those cases, the installation of the vertical and horizontal stabilizer will be covered in a unique features section of the playlist.